If you believe Donald Trump's communications team controlled the nightly news cycle, watch what happens when the three biggest hosts in television decide to synchronize their watches. By 11:45 p.m., the White House press office had entirely stopped answering their phones. By midnight, the coordinated digital strategy had crashed three separate trending algorithms. By morning, the very concept of dividing and conquering the media had been permanently shattered by a single, perfectly executed alliance. All of it started because one administration assumed late-night hosts were too competitive to ever share a target at the exact same moment. The atmospheric pressure inside the broadcast control rooms across New York and Los Angeles feels entirely wrong for standard late-night television, the air hanging heavy, thick, and undeniably electric. The brilliant studio lights push two stops brighter than normal, washing the three distinct stages in an unforgiving, clinical illumination that bleaches the usual warmth from the audiences. Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert, and Jon Stewart are already positioned at their respective marks, their postures perfectly still, their eyes scanning the monitors with the quiet, absolute control of broadcasters who hold the detonators to a massive, synchronized broadcast. The floor directors stand in the shadows, their headsets pushed entirely off their ears, realizing that for the first time in television history, the rival networks are sharing a live feed. There is no gentle bass line playing underneath their opening remarks, no polite industry chatter. The complete absence of sound acts as a suffocating physical presence. Donald Trump's entrance into the narrative happens not in person, but through a massive, looming executive threat designed to intimidate them individually. The massive production screens behind all three hosts flicker to life simultaneously, displaying Trump's recent, highly publicized press conference where he explicitly threatened to use the FCC to revoke the broadcast licenses of any network that dared to mock his administration. The moment his image appears, he spreads his arms wide over the presidential podium, physically expanding his footprint to own every possible inch of the camera's frame. His eyes lock onto the press pool with a flat, unwavering superiority, a gaze designed to shrink the media's presence in his own briefing room. He leans immediately into the microphone, delivering his opening line with a smirk heavily disguised as regulatory authority. "I was told these comedians are untouchable, but we are going to start looking very closely at their parent companies." He launches directly into a relentless verbal barrage on the synchronized video feeds, stacking his attacks in a deliberate rhythm designed to overwhelm the acoustic space of the briefing room. "Without me keeping them in line, these failing networks would just broadcast absolute partisan garbage every single night," he projects, his voice echoing sharply off the briefing room's acoustic paneling. He pivots seamlessly to a deeply personal dismissal, explicitly naming Kimmel, Colbert, and Stewart, calling them an unwatchable cartel fueled by Trump derangement syndrome. He claims total authority over the environment, loudly reminding the silent reporters that he dictates broadcast licenses, runs the regulatory agencies, and certainly does not need to tolerate a lecture from comedians hiding behind corporate lawyers. People tune in because they want absolute winners, and quite frankly, there is nobody left on those networks who even knows what winning looks like anymore, he concludes, crossing his arms definitively. Through this entire recorded onslaught, and through the frantic backstage panic of their respective networks, the three hosts stayed completely, terrifyingly silent. They simply watched the monitors, their expressions an unreadable mask of absolute calculation. A prominent network lawyer pacing the green room nervously adjusted his collar, the collective tension becoming a physical weight. The silence stretched out over the afternoon, turning the administration's booming rhetoric into a hollow echo chamber of its own profound insecurity. Then, Kimmel, Colbert, and Stewart finally move. They shift their weight slightly, leaning toward their respective cameras, and when they speak, their voices drop significantly lower, perfectly synchronized and entirely devoid of their usual late-night projection. "You keep talking about pulling our licenses to stop the conversation, so we decided to have the exact same conversation. Try pulling all of them at once." The three studios instantly go dead quiet, the air freezing in the lungs of every single attendee. The massive production screens behind them bypass their show's glossy graphics packages to display a raw, high-definition live satellite link connecting all three hosts. Displayed here in stark, silent clarity, the unprecedented alliance lands like a physical blow to the administration's intimidation tactics. Colbert does not raise his voice. He simply asks a devastating question about how a man claiming absolute strength relies on the architecture of isolated corporate fear to survive. Trump's immediate response online, triggered the moment the three-way broadcast hits the East Coast feeds, is a loud demand for the FCC to intervene instantly, calling the broadcast an illegal media monopoly and a threat to national security. Stewart counters calmly on live television, letting the digital demand hang in the dead air for a brutal 5-second pause before he quietly pulls a physical document from his desk. A low murmur ripples through the audiences, a collective realization that the hosts are actively daring the federal government to shut down the entire television industry. Stewart reaches slowly across his desk, moving with the deliberate precision of a surgeon operating on an exposed nerve. He holds up the paper, explicitly identifying it as the official legal precedent, proving their simultaneous broadcast is entirely protected under the First Amendment, while Kimmel and Colbert hold up identical copies on their own feeds. They stare at the cameras, tapping the papers against their desks in a slow, rhythmic challenge. The cameras push in tight on the motion, an undeniable physical manifestation of their absolute refusal to be picked off one by one. The screens behind them shift again, displaying a meticulously documented visual timeline connecting the exact minute of Trump's press conference threat to a simultaneous, massive surge in internal emails between the administration and the FCC, demanding immediate retaliation against ABC, CBS, and Comedy Central. The administration's digital proxies try to talk over the visual evidence online, their rhetoric rising in pitch as they dismiss the timeline as a desperate Hollywood hoax. Kimmel slows his cadence down even further on stage, forcing the rooms to absorb the sheer weight of the verified government overreach. The tension across the three studios is so thick, it feels actively dangerous. A raw audio recording suddenly overrides the house sound systems of all three networks. It is a captured voicemail left on an FCC commissioner's phone just hours before the broadcast, an administration official's voice, stripped of equalization, explicitly admitting they don't have the legal authority to stop the joint broadcast, but ordering the agency to manufacture a fake investigation anyway, just to scare the advertisers. The audiences are physically hit by the recording, a collective, sharp intake of breath vibrating through the stadium seating. Trump posts frantically that the audio is illegally obtained and heavily spliced by deep state operatives. Colbert does not argue. He simply displays the digital forensic verification from an independent cybersecurity firm on his main screen, proving the file is entirely, unequivocally unaltered. A former FCC liaison who had observed the previous 48 hours of chaos later provided a statement that went immediately viral. His testimony was entirely procedural, detailing exactly how the agency's communications team completely froze when they realized the hosts were coordinating, lacking any protocol for a unified media defiance. I rehearsed walking away 6 times in the parking garage before I finally found the courage to quit, the liaison admitted, his text-based account carrying remarkable control. Trump aggressively attacked the man's credibility online, yelling that he was fired for gross incompetence. The liaison absorbed the digital assault by letting the facts stand perfectly still. Then, a senior White House communications assistant, a woman forced to manage the frantic back and forth between the press office and the furious president while under the suffocating weight of a strict non-disclosure agreement, leaked her own account to an independent journalist. Her testimony was emotionally devastating, detailing the intense isolation and the profound professional cost of fighting a political cover-up disguised as standard broadcast regulation. Trump posted furiously, his digital face flushed dark red, shouting that she was a traitor betraying the loyalty of the administration. The assistant's leaked statement stared directly back at him, laced with absolute titanium. Silence doesn't protect anyone. It just makes the people who enforce it more comfortable. The internet did not cheer or scream. It broke. One major news outlet picked up the story. Another joined. Within seconds, the digital landscape was consumed by a slow, deliberate wave of sharing, not for the late-night hosts, but for the truth finally breathing in the open. The main screens on the 3 sets split in half, displaying the domestic FCC timeline on the left and on the right, matching internal logs proving the administration had intentionally drafted the broadcast threats to protect Trump's fragile ego, not to enforce actual television standards. The alignment is absolute and undeniable. Trump's online denials shift frantically from screaming about the joint broadcast to yelling that the servers were illegally hacked, a desperate pivot that exposes the sheer, naked panic beneath his anger. His digital collapse collapse unfolds across multiple, undeniable metrics. The frequency of his posts becomes heavily erratic, his rhetoric rising and falling in rapid, shallow bursts of capitalization. His arguments, previously gripping a semblance of executive authority, begin wiping frantically at the narrative, attempting to claim he never even cared about the comedian's shows. His digital posture slumps inward, his broad threat stiffening and shrinking as he leans away from the visual evidence of the massive, unedited joint broadcast dominating the trending topics. His focus darts aggressively around the platform, refusing to settle on the hosts, the leaked testimonies, or the raw documents, eventually going completely, terrifyingly silent. His verbal progression spirals from confident demand to accusing the networks of an illegal ambush, dropping into a procedural complaint about media monopolies, attempting a weak burst of bravado about his own poll numbers, and finally landing in total, absolute quiet. The three hosts look directly into their cameras, their expressions entirely neutral. The documents are on the table. The timeline is on the screen. The audio speaks for itself. Your move. Trump's feed remains completely still. The aftermath escapes the studios like a synchronized detonation. Backstage, the veteran network executives stand completely frozen, their phones lighting up as they watch the online metrics in stunned disbelief. Trump's lead communications director is seen typing so frantically on his phone that autocorrect sends pure nonsense to the press pool for 3 straight messages. Within 8 minutes, the first unauthorized clip of the three-way monologue hits the internet. Within 20 hours, the full, unedited segment reaches tens of millions of views, each click spreading at viral velocity. Cable news networks immediately cut into their morning programming, their graphics departments frantically rebuilding the timeline of the government threats with red arrows and annotations. Anchors replay the host's defiance, allowing their thematic anchor word to sit on the screen for a full segment without adding their own commentary. Trump's counterattack fails to materialize, replaced by a devastating absence from the public conversation. Yet, beneath his previous frantic demands, users reply with screenshots of the exact FCC threat logs proving the architecture of his intimidation. The public shift is instantaneous. People are no longer debating the politics of the late-night jokes. They are dissecting the psychology of an administration whose entire censorship facade shattered on live television. The assistant's testimony about silence becomes a global caption, trending worldwide as the definitive summary of the night. The story does not end with a sudden confession or a reversed policy. It burns slow, a digital fire that cannot be contained by late-night executive orders or corporate threats, because an architecture built on dividing the media only holds until the media finally decides to stand together. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications. The next confrontation is already building, and once you see what's coming, you'll understand why silence is always louder than power.